of the things I noticed is as the trading deadline, the pundits out there would put out there, here's what just happened, and Ken Rosenthal would do something, and Jeff Passan would do something. And so now the guys have to, and the people that do it have to credit the other people going, I heard it for Jeff Passan broke it first. Ken Rosenthal had it.
Oh, yeah, big breaking news.
And so, you have to credit the person where you heard it first. You can't just say it anymore because then you're stealing that other person's thunder.
You're stealing the scoop.
And so it's become such a scoopy thing in the trading deadline, and I don't even know how.
Well, luckily for us, we're already past it, so we don't have to bother with it.
I know. But so what do you think, Jeff Passan is doing? Has he got his line open to all 30 teams, and as soon as you make a deal, you let me know?
I think it's a combination of that, and the teams also want to have that because the teams know more fans are paying attention to Passan. So if you're if you're going to want to hype up your news, you're going to want to make sure he's the one breaking it because it's going to get to the most number of people.
It's a news event now, right?
Right.
So and you look back on the trading deadline this year. What are your thoughts in terms of so what just happened?
Not a whole lot. I think it's interesting because we're going to sit here and grade all of the trading deadline moves and talk about what moves were good and not. And I think you kind of have to look at these moves on two different axes to grade them, because they're on the one hand is what trades made teams immediately better because they're trying to compete for a World Series this year. And so you could give them a grade on that. Then when you're grading teams on the returns of prospects, that's so hard to grade them on because you grade them on the value of what they got back now or what those guys turn into.
You're so right. And I think it's even more than that because I think of a team like the Pirates. And so there was no way the Pirates could make a deal that would make them a World Series team this year.
Not without mortgaging their future to such an insane degree that it's not worth it.
But the Pirates, it would make sense for them to maybe make the playoffs. Like that would be a good thing for that franchise. So the moves that they would make, and I don't think that they did, would have been the barometer there. They don't have to be in a World Series, and they don't have to replenish their minor league system necessarily. They just need to take steps forward.
I think going out and getting a guy like Brian De La Cruz to play outfield for you at least gives you another bat in a pretty weak lineup. But when your big pitching acquisition is Josh Walker or Jalen Beeks, if your big infield acquisition is IKF, I really don't know what that's saying about, And I think that the Pirates basically said, okay, this isn't our year. We're clearly not going to be competing for a World Series this year. Let's take some marginal upgrades and try and make the playoffs.
And that's a preview. We'll go through each of the 30 teams, but I think you're right. And I think I guess for me, last thing on the Pirates would be when you've got Skeens and you've got Jared Jones and you've got Mitch Keller, you've got 3 top of the rotation starters, and you think, wow, this could be that moment when they're all sort of at their peak.
That's a big ask to be like, oh yeah, they could just all catch fire and win a World Series.
I'm just saying, is this the best Paul Skeens we're ever going to see, or is he just going to get better?
I don't think it's the best of any of them that we've seen so far.
So then they did the right thing by not going all in and mortgaging the future.
Whereas you kind of go to a team like the Orioles, could go back to the American League, look at the American League East. They looked pretty all in with their moves at this deadline. They made a lot of moves to go and get some big name players, including guys like Zach Eflin from the Rays.
Well, let's hold that. We'll get to the Orioles in a second, and I wanted to mention that the 3 names that everybody were sure were going to be traded. They were sure. The 3 lefties, right? Tarek Skubal of the Tigers. It was going to be Garrett Crochet.
I feel like people backed
Blake Snell. Blake Snell. Those were the 3 lefties. They were all going to be traded. I didn't believe it myself, but
I feel like that's a bit. You're stepping a bit there because I don't think it was for sure that those 3 of those guys were getting traded.
Some people were convinced.
People were dumb if they were convinced because I can understand being convinced Crochet is going to go. That makes sense. The market for a guy like Blake Snell was very limited because he's going to cost a ton both in your payroll and in the prospects you're going to have to give up to go get him. And Skubal, why would the Tigers trade it? Right.
I agree with you on that.
People misconstrued the fact that the Tigers were like, yeah, we'll listen to offers because if some team backed up a Trey Turner type deal for them, they would be dumb not to take that. If some team came up being like, yeah, we'll give you 3 top 100 prospects for Skubal, you'd be like, okay, well now we at least have to listen. But not even 1 top 100 prospect.
Right, not one top 100 prospect was moved at the trading deadline, which tells you and tells me that everybody's evaluating the players the same way, and so it's hard to steal a guy now or have such a different opinion about somebody than another organization.
Right.
does.
I think it's less that you're stealing a guy and more that some team doesn't value, oh yeah, or they overvalue some guy and they'll be like, yeah, we'll give you your top 100 prospect. And I think it's less that and more that the only couple of guys on the market that could have demanded top prospects, they didn't go for the most part.
Right.
Like, if you think about it, the guys that would have demanded top prospects, Skubal, Crochet, Vlad Guerrero Jr., Brent Rooker, Snell, Robert, all of those guys would have demanded top-of-the-line premium prospects, and not one of them got traded. So when the best guys getting traded around are Jazz Chisholm, Randy Arozarena, who had not been having a good year up until recently, and, Jack Flaherty, you're not going to get a lot.
He was the best pitcher traded at the deadline.
That tells you a lot about the market.
That's what I think. Jack Flaherty for the Dodgers was just a great acquisition. Well, yeah,
No,
he's okay.
It's only going to get hyped up because he's the best pitcher that moved, so people are going to act like it's a bigger deal than it actually was.
The Dodgers need their other pitchers to come back and
Right.
pitch effectively, I think. And maybe Jack Flaherty would be the 3-starter in a playoff series, maybe. And you think about trade deadline acquisitions, and we don't talk about the historical great ones, but the guy that got traded at the deadline that was World Series MVP, and I was always proud as a Met fan that Don Clendenin in 1969, all those years ago, was the guy that, and then I found out it wasn't just Don Clendenin, it was Jorge Soler when the Braves won in 2021. That was also named World Series MVP after he was moved to the trading deadline. So you know what the Braves did this year?
They traded for him again.
They traded for him again. He's just older now, by the way, and not as good as he was then.
And they're desperate for some pop in their lineup and some life in that team. So, it seems to be working. They've been playing better, a little bit better recently. But I think even if Soler gets them to the playoffs, they're probably not looking at having another magical run.
We'll talk about that. I completely agree. And the Dodgers, just as an aside, so the Dodgers last year at the deadline traded for Ahmad Rosario.
Mm-hmm.
And then he signed with Tampa this year,
Mm-hmm.
and the Dodgers traded again this year at the trading deadline for Ahmad Rosario. Why don't you just keep the guy if you like them that much? I don't understand why you're doing that.
Yeah, it was kind of I guess because they known quantity maybe.
So is there a team like the Rangers last year, right? And they didn't make giant moves at the trading deadline last year. If you think about the teams out there, that there could be just a team lying in the weeds, like the Rangers were last year. Nobody thought they were going to win the World Series at the trading deadline last year. They were not in position to do that.
I think the question is so are you saying is there somebody that isn't one of the favorites? The favorites, I guess, at this point being the Orioles, maybe the Yankees.
Orioles, Yankees, Phillies, Dodgers.
Right.
That would be my top 4 teams.
Are you going to pick them or the field to win the World Series?
The field.
Right, and that's just basic, basic odds. So
Right.
I feel like it's not quite as being like, oh, is there some team lurking there in the
That's
weeds?
even now when you look at those teams going, well, who's better than those guys? Oh, some other team.
Well, the
probably.
Phillies haven't played right, and exactly, and it's not about which is necessarily the best team. One of those 4 teams could be the best overall team. It doesn't necessarily mean they're going to win the World Series.
So let's get into the teams themselves. And you already talked about the Orioles a little bit, and are the Orioles winners or losers? I guess they're considered winners, and I'd have to because they at least tried to do something.
Right, they went out and they did get Zach Eflin to start for them. They got Trevor Rogers to relieve for them, and Sir Anthony Dominguez.
Rogers is going to start for them.
Rogers. Oh, okay. And then they got Eloy Jimenez. Okay, that was a little bit of a weird move, I thought.
I think that's just an insurance policy. I mean, Jackson Holiday
On
came
what?
back to the Orioles today, by the way,
Yeah, and hit
a grand slam in his first game, first home run in the major leagues.
Right, but I feel like you would have. I don't know. I feel like Eloy. You don't have. He's not an insurance policy. You need an insurance policy for him because he's just not been very good.
Well, fortunately, he's not going to necessarily play that much. I don't
Right,
think
but
they're going to put him in the lineup. So
but-
he's just there going, if somebody goes down, we actually have a capable major league player that can play for him.
He's hitting 240 this year.
Well, in some circles, that's capable.
Right.
So, I think the Orioles did win, if you will, in terms of they enhanced their chances for a team that was already very good.
Right, and I think that's what you would probably say about a lot of the better teams, like that they were just trying to enhance their chances because for the most part there weren't top-of-the-line guys available to be moved around.
And nobody, and including the Orioles, were willing to trade their top prospects. Nobody.
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 Right.
Nobody
it's
did that.
Like The Red Sox, they made a bunch of moves. They got Danny Jansen, but like for the most part, has anybody been writing about how they traded Pablo Reyes or they traded Zach Short? Like, there's a lot of guys that ended up moving that were guys nobody's heard of.
I think the Red Sox are losers, so I'm going to put them. And most of the teams, we're gonna rate, right. So the Orioles are winners. The Red Sox are losers are going to be neither winners nor losers.
Yeah. So why are they losers? What should have they been doing?
I think the Red Sox, actually have a better chance to do something than a lot of other teams because they have played well this season. They're right in the middle of it. They needed a pitcher. They couldn't, like all the other teams, they couldn't find a pitcher to go and bring in.
They got James Paxton.
Yeah, that's what I mean. And I don't think he's going to be the answer. But they should have been at the front of the line for, I guess, the guys that ended up being available.
And so what bugs me about that is if I'm not going to kill other teams for not going out and getting a top-of-the-line pitcher when one didn't exist, I can't put them in the losers category for doing exactly that. There wasn't a top-of-the-line pitcher for them to go and get.
Well, aside from a Blake Snell.
But he wasn't traded.
He wasn't traded, and clearly none of the teams were willing to give up what it would have cost to get that guy if he was even available.
Right, I know. That's a huge. We're making a huge supposition there that, oh, yeah, we could have definitely traded for Blake Snell. Obviously, you give them enough prospects and they'll
If you would have given him prospects for Crochet, but except that he only wanted to be a starter,
right?
Well, maybe that would have been fine for the Red Sox.
Well, clearly it wasn't.
Yeah, I feel like the Red Sox missed an opportunity. They made a lot of deals. There's like how many deals? It's like 12 or 13 different deals the Red Sox made.
A bunch of guys were traded for cash.
The wrong Luis Garcia
Right.
from the Angels, Luis Garcia, not the Mariners one. They got Danny Jansen, as a backup
I guess they needed a catcher. Yeah.
Backup catcher. They talk about Quinn Priester, right? The guy who's on the Pirates and all that. Oh, that was an under-the-radar deal. Have you seen this guy's stats? Like, not very good. So maybe he's got potential, but not this year.
But I think for me that it's just like I can't really say that they did anything bad or good because it's like, well, they didn't give up any big name prospects, but they didn't bring anybody back. So that's, to me, that's more neither winner.
Lucas Sims, Garrett Cooper,
yeah.
Zach Short. He's crapped out 3 or 4 places this year already. Zach Short. So yeah, I kind of just I'm more down on the Red Sox maybe than you are. The Yankees,
Getting Jazz was a good move. That was the move everybody was roughly suggesting them to do. He fits into their team well, and the less that, even though DJ LeMahieu did hit a grand slam today on Wednesday.
Yeah. 6 RBIs.
I think you're probably hoping that Jazz can slide in and play, a consistent second for you.
Because he right now has a chance to be the greatest trade deadline acquisition in Major League Baseball history.
Let's pump the brakes on that and have the Yankees make the playoffs.
He's played 3 games.
Right.
He's got 4 home runs. We're done now. Because clearly he's going to, if they play 30 games, he's going to hit 40 home runs.
I don't think it works that way.
Oh, okay, well, maybe not. But he's certainly come in there, and because you have Judge and Soto in the clubhouse, I'm hoping that Jazz can fit in a way that he doesn't have to stand out just because no one else is interested in anybody else on the team.
The big thing right now is he's provided a spark of life for that team that they
needed it badly, and they just finished the sweep of the Phillies. Thank you.
So it seemed to have done something. They did get Mark Leiter Jr. as sort of their other meaningful acquisition.
This is a swing and miss pitcher, and I didn't realize that his dad, as well as his uncle, so Mark Leiter Sr. and Al Leiter, both pitched for the Yankees.
So getting him there, I think it's a good move, but at the same time, it's hard for me to see that as a needle mover for the Yankees, especially when their rotation and bullpen were already a little suspect.
Yeah, well, what they didn't get was the pitcher, the Yankees, right?
Right, but nobody did.
But there wasn't a pitcher to be...
And they were in on Flaherty. They just backed off because they didn't like his medicals.
Credit to them for that, right? If they saw something in the medicals that didn't, that didn't work, there's a couple of teams that did that with Carlos Correa last year. I don't know how both the Mets and the Giants feel about. Well, we passed on Carlos
considering
Correa
how much
in spring training. It wasn't the trading deadline.
I think they feel okay with that one.
Yeah, I think so too. At this point, Tampa. So everybody feels Tampa is a winner, right? So what they did was like trade a lot of guys, and they got a lot of prospects because the Rays knew what they were, and they said, "This is not our year. We're a 500 team. We're going to sell." And
I think it's so much more than that. They knew what they were in that they were a stuck franchise. They had built their team around the idea that we finally assigned our homegrown superstar to have him play shortstop. And then he went and did what he did.
Yeah, you've been on this Wander Franco thing the whole time.
And so now you are a team that is that team at best is a wild card team every single year.
Or a 500 team
Right,
this,
or a
year,
500
this year.
year. They were going to be stuck in the equivalent of baseball purgatory. Their team was good enough that they were never going to be bad enough that you could rebuild, but they were also never going to be good enough to actually compete. So it makes perfect sense to sell off all of these guys, get a bunch of prospects as you get ready to go move into a new stadium and go, okay, let's retool the franchise and get better instead of bringing in what's going to be an aging and increasingly mediocre prospects over the next bunch of years.
And the Rays, I completely agree. And obviously, the best deal they made was the new stadium, actually. And the thing that they did also that was great is they know that they've got all these pitchers coming back next year. Drew Rasmussen, Jeffrey Springer.
They'll be better just because of that.
They're going to have a lot of Shane Baz is just coming back now. They just got a lot of pitchers that are good quality major league pitchers are going to come back next year. So they'll be better just because they're going to have their guys.
Right, and they're just going to have an issue where they're going to be anemic on offense next year because it's hard to think that team in particular is going to go out and spend a bunch of money on offense this offseason.
The Blue Jays, they were thought to have done well.
They're the discount version of the Rays.
Yeah, I kind of feel that way. Like, did they really do that well? They did the right thing.
They did the right thing. And anybody saying, oh, well, they didn't trade Vlad Guerrero Jr., just money-wise, in terms of, like, the financials of that team, he's a big reason why people go and watch the Blue Jays. So if you trade Vlad Guerrero Jr., you're basically telling your fans, check out for the next 3 or 4 years. We're going into a rebuild. And that's a really tough thing to sell on a fan base, especially when this team was thought to be pretty good. So the fact that they held on to Bichette and Vlad Guerrero Jr. is kind of telling you, okay, we're not done trying to compete. And somehow they managed to get actual things back for.
Well, they got a lot
for Kikuchi, which blows my mind.
They got way more for Kikuchi than the Dodgers had to pay for Jack Flaherty. By the way,
I don't understand how they managed to swing. The Astros must have been desperate.
And I like Kikuchi. I like this deal more than most people because, as you pointed out off air, Kikuchi has not been very good this year. So to
give up a bunch
of turn it around all at once, that's a lot to expect. So, but I think at least from the Blue Jays' perspective, they made a decision like the Rays did.
Right.
We're going to sell. We're going to go forward.
Goodbye, Justin Turner. Goodbye, IKF. Goodbye, Danny Jansen. Let's get better.
Right.
Well, let's get organizationally stronger, I guess I should say.
We'll go to the Central, and I don't know how much time you want to spend talking about the White Sox.
I rarely want to spend time talking about the White Sox.
So their big chip, Eric Fetty, they didn't get very much for him.
No, that felt like a bad trade for them.
And I just don't. Again, I don't know that they know what they are right now. I think that organization is a bigger mess than the Blue Jays, which are a mess.
Well, what I can hope is that maybe they'll go. I think they're losers at this trade deadline just because they had some of the biggest pieces potentially available on the market to trade, and they only traded one of them, and they didn't get a particularly good return back for him, I think you could argue. Now, if there's more of a market for guys like Garrett Crochet and Luis Robert Jr. this offseason, and that's why they didn't trade them, that at least makes a little more sense, but it's hard to give them anything that's called resembling a good grade for this
I'm not buying. I think they blew it, and I don't think Garrett Crochet's value will ever be as high as it was 2 days ago.
Unless he finishes the season super strong.
Yeah, I'm not thinking. The Guardians, their big deals include getting Alex Cobb and Lane Thomas.
Well, they get the idea of Alex Cobb.
Yeah, right, because he hasn't pitched this year.
Right,
by the way.
exactly. So you're really getting Alex Cobb. You're getting the promise that maybe one day he'll come back.
He's
and
a
play
good
baseball.
guy in the clubhouse, and he can give you strong innings.
And I'm sorry, Lane Thomas is when you have to describe a guy as a nice player, that tells you all what a lot of you're thinking about him. And Lane Thomas is a nice player.
And as much as I like to compliment Alex Cora of the Red Sox, Stephen Vogt has done an excellent job managing the Guardians this year to get them, to play a brand of baseball in a way that I didn't think they were going to be able to do this year. Frankly, lose Terry Francona. So the best deal they made was before the trading deadline is bringing this guy in to manage the team.
And if you're the Guardians at the end of the day, you're still saying, you know what, we're starting August with the AL's best record. We feel pretty good about our chances going into the postseason.
But do you really feel the Guardians in the playoffs are a team you're going to worry about the way they're? I don't either.
No, they have to prove it. The same way I'm not ready to be worried about the Orioles in the postseason until they can win a postseason
series. I think one bad postseason is not a trend to say, well, they're never going to be good.
No, but they got to prove to me that they're ready to do it before I'm ready to be
fair.
like, okay, they're here. Because they got, they were the best record in baseball last year, and they got smacked around at their own place.
They got booted by the eventual world champions, obviously. The Tigers, I still don't feel the Tigers know what they are.
The fact that they get a good grade from me because they didn't trade Skubal.
Well, I don't know if they should get. I don't even know who. Like somebody else must have whipped up that rumor, right? Because would the Tigers really have done that?
I think it was more somebody. It's one of those things where it's like, oh yeah, the Tigers are listening to offers on Skubal. It's like, okay, yeah, I'm sure the Mets are listening to offers on guys like Lindor and Vientos. Like, yeah, they're listening to offers because if somebody came up to them and it's like, yeah, we'll give you the kingdom. We'll give you our kingdom for this guy. You're like, yeah, okay, yeah, we'll do it.
So I'm going to give you all the players the Tigers acquired this year at the around the trading deadline.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Theron Liranzo, Joseph Montalvo, and Chase Lee. Liam Hicks, Eric Silva, Ricky Vanasco, C.J. Weens, and Buddy Kennedy. Have you ever heard of any of those baseball players?
No. No, I think that's not entirely fair because.
But that's everybody.
Right. But if you read out the list of prospects for most teams, like I wouldn't know who those guys
are.
And
again, so if it's a prospect thing for the Tigers, I guess that would be positive. And they did, I guess, sell, except for Skubal, which they shouldn't have sold anyway, as you said. I think the Tigers still don't know what they are. They're losers as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and they didn't get amazing return for Flaherty, who was the best pitcher that was traded.
The Royals, meh. Right? They didn't do anything bad. They didn't do anything good.
I like going and getting a guy like Michael Lorenzen, who just at least gives you a guy that has given good starts. Though he had those 2 good starts for the Phillies last year, and then proceeded to do nothing.
I guess Lucas Erceg is the guy, right? The crown jewel, I guess.
And I guess
who isn't Mason Miller, by the way?
Right. The problem when you get trading for Paul DeYoung doesn't really make sense because you've got Bobby Witt Jr. He ain't taking any time for him.
He's just a guy you need to have on your team when somebody
when
can't play or
blow.
something like that. So yeah, I just would say the Royals just kind of held serve, and I'd say the same thing is true, leaning towards the losers for the Twins.
Well, they didn't do anything.
They only had 2 deals.
Right. They got a solid reliever in Trevor Richards, and that's it. They traded another guy to the Diamondbacks for cash. So it's hard for me. If I'm the Twins and I watched that series where they played in New York, where they, other than today,
I was there today, by the way. I watched that debacle.
They didn't really hit too well, and you don't add any kind of bat at the deadline, especially when you've got a team of guys of like Carlos Correa, Byron Buxton, and Royce Lewis are all any kind of a single at bat away from an IL trip.
I don't think their lineup is bad. Watching the guys they had playing today, some of those guys I wasn't really familiar with that are good ball players.
It's not a bad lineup. It's just half the lineup's always on the IL.
I think they had a chance to run the Guardians down, and they didn't do enough to make that more likely.
No, I think that's totally true.
That's what I would say. So if we go to the West, the Astros, same thing. Meh. They didn't. They did a few things. They got Kikuchi. I think I
they
believe
overpaid
in that.
for him.
You can say that and all that. If it works out, it's fine. They got Caleb Ferguson and Luis Rodriguez from the White Sox.
They got a bunch of guys you've never heard of.
Right. Well, I know these guys barely. Brendan Bielek from the A's, but they're paying cash for a lot of these deals. Nick Hernandez for cash to the Padres. Joe Cuno to the Blue Jays for cash. Right. Do these teams need cash that much?
No, it's because they're nothing players. Like just because we know their name and it's like, yes, I have seen him in a major league game before doesn't mean he's any kind of needle mover.
So the Angels got kind of a middling grade to a little bit better, and I think that's because
they got a good return for Luis Garcia.
They got a good return, and they did a good job on Estevez, who went to the Phillies. Because I like the Phillies pitchers they traded for him. There's Sam Aldeguerri and George Klassen. These are seriously good pitchers.
I think they could have looked at trading some other guys from their roster, but I get why they did what they did, and they'll be better for it.
It's not going to make much
Getting
of a difference.
prospects is a good thing.
And, I guess the A's did okay. It's hard to evaluate.
It was kind of like what we talked about at the beginning of the episode. When you're evaluating these teams that traded away players for prospects, are you evaluating them on what the prospects are right now in terms of their, prospective status?
Right.
Or are we evaluating them on what they eventually become? Because that's really hard to say, depending on what you're doing there. I think most people would say, well, you're more evaluating them on what they become.
I agree.
And so
which is why the A's should have tried to trade Brent Rooker.
Right.
I don't know why he's still an A. I don't know.
Because you need something to sell the fans to come and watch.
In Sacramento next year? Really? They didn't trade Mason Miller because he smashed his hand against the wall and took himself out.
They probably would have liked to do that.
I think that's a great way to not get traded, by the way.
Smart.
I was mad and I punched something with my non-throwing hand and my hand is broken, so I can't pitch anymore. So, I don't want to trade for this guy. Oh, that's too bad.
Because he literally can't.
I guess so. I guess he'll be happy in Sacramento next year. The Mariners, well, what do you think?
I think I think they did well because they probably acquired the best 2 bats that were on the market and available for going for Randy Arozarena and Justin Turner. They also got a very good reliever in Yimi Garcia from the Blue Jays. So I think those 3 moves right there are at least the ownership of the Mariners showing we're trying to win this division, even though we've really just not been able to, assert ourselves in it. They've at least tried to make that team better this year.
They didn't need Snell or any of the guys that he didn't get
No,
traded.
they needed bats.
They needed bats, and so they, earlier in the offseason, they were talking about Pete Alonso. They finally parted ways with Ty France, and I think Justin Turner, and I guess he's going to play third there, but I could kind of see him playing first to a degree.
Yeah, third, first. They'll just find a way to get his bat in the lineup.
And
Same
he's
with
the right
Arozarena.
guy to have on a team at this point for a team that's
I think bringing in 2 guys that have
between.
won in Arozarena and Justin Turner are very good for them as well. That should hopefully help that
So I give the Mariners, they were winners at the trade deadline as far as I'm concerned. Unlike the Rangers, they weren't losers. They were meh again.
But I think the Rangers off a World Series win last year, who have a zillion guys that are injured or just not playing particularly well. I don't think it made a lot of sense to trade a bunch of guys around to try and.
I agree.
Why would this isn't the year you try to salvage the season? You literally just won the World Series last year. You're not going to sell the farm to try and get another one this year.
The take on the Rangers is from the Athletic, and I think this is a good one. They really need to have their reinstated players come off the injured list. The players that be reinstated. So DeGrom, Tyler Mahle, Cody Bradford, Josh Young. And Young is already back, and so is Bradford. So I think that's going to make the difference for them if there's going to be a difference there.
I just don't think there's going to be a difference.
Well, Jacob DeGrom was a pretty good pitcher at one time.
Right now, he's approaching like myth status, where it's like I'm more intrigued by the idea that there was once a Jacob DeGrom, and there might one day be a Jacob DeGrom again.
And can you just think about 2 things? A quick aside. So you think about Jacob DeGrom and Yamamoto of the Dodgers. Neither of them are pitching because they're injured. If the Mets had signed those guys to giant deals,
It would really suck.
oh God, it would be the people would be screaming. So
That's why I'm glad they did. That's why I was totally okay with letting him walk.
So we'll go over to the National League and we'll talk about the Braves. And we already talked about Jorge Soler and that being their big acquisition in addition to bringing back. Who else did they bring back? Another guy from that team. Well, they brought back Duvall. They've got like the whole gang back from the 2021 World Series.
Right. But it's like, oh man, they got Soler back and they got Zach Short. Like, I mean, I guess if you're really saying, oh yeah, Soler is going to be the needle mover, but I think that what that's telling you is they're not in love with Jared Kelenic.
No. Well, and he's actually done okay for them.
Well, I think that boneheaded move in the Met game, talking about the bunt, really hurt his chances with them.
But the Braves they have Chris Sale, who is having a great year. Who knows how long that will last? But let's say that it does. They've still got Max Fried, who's on a free agent, a contract look next year. So he's going to obviously try to pitch if he gets healthy enough to come back. I think he will. And they got Lopez, who just went down with a forearm injury.
Right.
That's a little iffy.
You're talking to yourself.
What I'm saying, those are 3 really good pitchers.
And only one of them is actively pitching right now.
So
and he's a walking injury.
I think if you're the Braves, you would have been tempted to do something, and Alex Anthopoulos decided not to.
No, I think you were tempted to not do something.
And that's what Alex
Right,
Anthopoulos
because with
did.
so many injuries, not necessarily overall, but to key guys on that team, it doesn't make sense to trade prospects if Fried was here and healthy, if Strider was here and healthy, if Acuna was here and healthy, if Michael Harris Jr. was here and healthy. Okay, yeah, that makes sense to go all in and trade some prospects. But when all of those guys you don't trade prospects to try and plug holes. That doesn't make sense.
And to your point, so in 2021 they had Acuna that they lost, but they really didn't lose anybody else.
Right, everybody else.
This year you lose Acuna and Strider. That's like a note to you early in the season, going, not this year.
Right. It doesn't make sense.
Not this year.
Right, and whereas it made sense for a team like the Marlins, who came off a playoff run last year, who I think most really plugged-in baseball fans said, well, they're a prime candidate for regression, which has clearly struck them.
Definitely.
And they said, okay, well, we didn't win a World Series this time, but we're still going to sell all our assets.
Yeah, and I saw a meme, a photo of Sandy Alcantara in an empty room when he comes back to spring training next year, going, all the guys that he knew from the team before, there aren't anybody there. They're all gone.
Now, they got a boatload.
They got a lot of prospects.
More than probably any other team,
Yep.
just because of the
Yep.
sheer number of people that were traded.
Yep.
And we're not even counting trades that they did earlier this season, like when they traded Luis Arias. So I think when you look at them, they got a good return for Jazz Chisholm. They got a fantastic return for Tanner Scott. They got a good return for Trevor Rogers. They got a surprising return from De La Cruz and AJ Puck. So they had a bunch of deals where they were able to get a lot of prospects for their guys. And now you have to hope that, okay, when these pitchers come back, one or two of those offensive prospects, can really work out for us. And now we've rebuilt into being a stronger team.
And they're winners, right? Because they knew what they were, and they did what you had to do.
Right, exactly. They were winners. And they didn't, I guess it's hard for a team like them to be losers, because the only way they're really losers is if they inexplicably bought, which I don't think any 37-win team is going to do, or if they failed to sell guys, and they were one of the teams that was most successful at that. So they're obviously winners.
Our Mets, our favorite team, they were busy.
David
David Stearns was busy.
They get a pass from
He
me.
was, well, like I said, it's neither winners nor losers thing. They resisted the temptation, as did every other team. So I don't know how much credit they should get.
I don't think we could say they resisted the temptation to trade
top prospects
for
to try to go for it this year, because there wasn't out there the ability to do that.
Right. The ability to trade for a guy like Blake Snell is equally dependent on the Giants' willingness to trade him. So I can't be like, oh, well, they didn't go out and get him when he might have never been available.
And that's the only player I think I would have been willing to overpay for, because Snell was only under contract for one more year at $30 million. And he hasn't pitched that much this year, so he's always at his best late in the season. Mm-hmm. And I thought if the Mets were lucky enough to get into a wild card, having a rotation where Snell is at the top of your rotation and the other guys they might plug in is a much better team.
But that's also being a greedy Met fan.
Of course.
Because before the season, we both sat here and talked about how we were totally fine not making the playoffs and how we couldn't expect that. And now here we are, right after the trade line, going, wish they had given up the farm for Blake Snell.
Only because it's a weird year in MLB in general. You start to think, the Rangers kind of came out of nowhere last year.
You can't let that seduce you.
Yeah, and they didn't. And,
right.
And David Stearns didn't, and the Mets didn't. But if the Mets get in the playoff, I think that they are an easy out.
They were going to be an easy out if they got Snell.
I think you're right.
Meanwhile, a team that isn't going to be an easy out, a team like the Phillies, they said, oh, we're all in. Let's go get us a great reliever from the Rangers. Let's go get us an outfielder from the Orioles. Like they said, no, we're making a run.
The Angels. He came from the Angels. Estevez, you mean?
No, Estevez Austin Hayes came from the Orioles.
Oh, okay, yes, yeah, he's a position player.
Yeah, I said an outfielder.
Yeah. I thought you said reliever. I think you're right that and the Phillies, when you get swept in a series like they did,
the Phillies
against the Yankees, I'm not worried about the Phillies.
The Phillies only care about the only sweep that matters to them is if it happens in the playoffs.
Yeah, and they'd be the ones probably doing the sweeping. So I'd say the Phillies are winners actually, because they did the things they needed to do to position themselves better.
Mm-hmm. The Nationals, they sold the guys that they had that had value, I think, for the most part.
They should have traded Finnegan too. There's no reason
to keep him.
There's no reason. They could have gotten more. They were clearly sellers, so good for them. And give them maybe a lean toward being winners because they knew what they were.
The fact
and
they
sold.
got 3 different prospects
Right.
for Lane Thomas is impressive in
Right.
of itself.
So, but I just think that they should have gone all the way and traded not Lane Thomas, Finnegan as well. So and Josh Bell being traded. That was a good idea also. I think, that was not a guy who was going to ever be a contributor to a good Nationals team.
No, that's totally correct.
It's not happening for a long time.
The Cubs, as we move to the Central, I thought was a confusing deal. I get the Isaac Paredes deal, trading away Morrill and some guys, but why?
I think that the Cubs know, and I think Craig Counsell, who was brought in to sort of make the magic happen for the Cubs and have them make the playoffs, this is not their year. It's just not there, right? The things did not break and go in the direction they wanted to. So they didn't do too much, and they did, I think, a good thing in trading Paredes for Christopher Morel, because I'm not convinced about Morel, who did hit a home run today, of course.
Oh, right, of course, but I think that doesn't
20th.
really change anything.
No. I just feel like the Cubs kind of tried to straddle the line and
which kind of makes them neither.
They end up hanging up on the bar.
Right, yeah. They punted the trade deadline.
And I would say the same thing is true about the Reds. The Reds,
I think the Reds are disappointing because they were a team that, by all counts, are performing better than what their records show, but at the same time, they can't really seem to get out from under that. So it kind of makes sense for them to.
Yeah, I don't put them in the losers column. I just think, like, I don't know what you guys are doing.
They got any kind of return for Frankie Montas is impressive.
Right. And you know, the Ty France deal was a good one. Is in that ballpark. He might be a better hitter because Nolan is a pretty good hitter in Seattle because it's really hard to hit there.
He looked pretty shot for them though.
So yeah, and I don't think Montas was a big deal. I don't think the Brewers are going to reap a lot of rewards.
But the Brewers, I at least get why they're doing it because they got Montas, they got Aaron Savale from the Rays. They also went and got Nick Mears from the Rockies, whose advanced stats jump off the page.
They got Dallas Keuchel too.
No, we don't need to talk
really?
about that.
And Kristen Yelich, I don't know. Have we heard yet that they haven't really said that he's done for the year, but he's not playing.
He went to go see a back specialist.
Yeah,
That's never
a good
sign.
thing at all. And so I think the Brewers are in a lot of trouble.
I think that's very
And
true.
now they're getting back, we mentioned in the prior podcast, they're getting back Devin Williams, so certainly their bullpen will be better. They have still good pitching, surprisingly, considering they gave up Corbin Burns, who's been excellent, and they don't have the other pitcher, Brandon Woodruff, who you thought was going to contribute, but I think they're ripe for the pickings. I'm not sure who, though, in the Central would do that picking.
The Central's competing.
Not the Pirates.
No, the Central's competing to get knocked out in the playoffs by the other teams right now.
So we talked about the Pirates to start. So and the Cardinals, I guess they're winners. I don't like this team, but they keep exceeding my own expectations.
Right, they're exceeding expectations. So they went and they got a pitcher in Fetty. They went and got a solid outfielder in Tommy Pham. They got rid of Tommy Edman, which I'm sure they're thrilled about.
Well, he hasn't played this year.
Right, and they also went and got Michael Kopech, and so
some of their the prospects, that they traded were good players. The White Sox picked up some good prospects. Alexander Albertus is a real good player. Vargas, Gerald Perez. So I think they gave up stuff to not really change their position.
Right, but they might say, you know what? We're in second place. We're a game and a half outside the wild card, and we've not played great this year. Why sell a bunch of our prospects to maybe not make the playoffs still?
Who starts game one of a Cardinal wild card game?
The Cardinals don't care. They made the wild card.
Okay. Yeah, I just think, is it Eric Fetty? Okay, are we done now?
I think if you're the problem with that is if that's your criteria for making a move, there's basically no reason for any team that isn't a World Series contender to make a move.
Well, and the reason the Cardinals get a win for me is that they didn't give up anything.
Right. So
to speak of, they gave up
there
a
has
couple
to
of
be a level of
prospects.
understanding that not every team can make moves that are going to make them into a World Series contender, and there is value in making the playoffs because you can get hot and go on a run. So if I'm the Cardinals, I'm saying, sure, Eric Fetty might be our game one starter, but I'd rather be playing a game one in the playoffs than not make them at all.
So where do you have the D-backs? Because, these are the defending National League champions. Their big deal was getting left-hander A.J. Puck from the Marlins and I guess Dylan Floro from the Nationals, so they fortified the bullpen.
Like the Dodgers, the biggest acquisitions they make at the trading deadline are going to be guys coming off the injured list. If Merrill Kelly and Eduardo Rodriguez can come back and be effective for them, they've got a shot in the West. They've really climbed back recently. They've been playing much better. They're in the wild card right now. They're tied with the Padres. But they need their pitchers to come back for them to have a chance, and now they at least have one more power arm in the bullpen backing them up in A.J. Puck.
I think the big told story there is, so they brought in Josh Bell because Christian Walker has an oblique injury. Oblique injuries are bad.
Right.
Christian Walker
And
and Josh Bell, that is not anything close to being equivalent.
No, especially not as hitters, and especially not as a fielder.
Right. So I think that's a big difference that will hurt the Diamondbacks. The Rockies, how much time should we spend talking about the Rockies?
I mean, they traded a couple relievers away. They got okay.
Mears, you mentioned him.
Mears, yeah. They also
And
traded
Beeks.
Beeks to the Pirates, but they didn't really get a lot back. But they were kind of in a situation where they had uncomfortable questions about trading. Do you get rid of Ryan McMahon or do you get rid of Elias Diaz?
And Elias Diaz, I like that player, so I think that's okay to keep him, although he's not young. So the thing is, are the Rockies going to be a contending team? Forget about next year. In 2 years,
Probably
well,
not.
Elias Diaz is going to be in his early to mid 30s by then. So why didn't you trade him?
Right. But I can't kill.
Why
a
did you
team
trade
for
Cal
not-
Quantrill?
Well, because did they get and I guess it's tough to say, well, did they get the prospects they wanted back because this was such a seller's market? But at the same time, we saw guys not get traded for really the value. This was just a weird. I think this was just a low impact trading deadline.
Yeah, you're
and
right.
you can't really punish teams for not making a big impact when not anybody really did.
And Quantrill is, a guy who's willing to pitch in Colorado. And when a guy actually is willing to pitch there, you kind of want to keep him if he's halfway
Exactly.
decent because nobody wants to pitch there. The Dodgers and the Padres, we got to talk about both of those two teams. The Dodgers did a lot. I'm not sure how much of it was positive or negative. I don't know if you consider them winners or neither.
It's tough for me to really call them winners because other than Jack Flaherty, how many of these guys are going to actually be playing meaningful baseball for them in the postseason?
Well, you're right, and that's another team that just needs to get some of its injured players back.
That team is about, does Mookie come back and play like he does? Do any of the pitchers come back?
The rest of it doesn't matter.
The rest of it doesn't matter.
Yeah. I mean,
Kevin Biggio, Kevin Kiermaier, Ahmed Rosario. Mookie doesn't come back, and he's not Mookie. If at least a couple pitchers don't come back and give them quality, it doesn't matter what they did at the trade deadline.
And bringing in, like we mentioned, Biggio earlier before the trading deadline has not had the benefit the Dodgers were looking for, at least not to this point.
I think they weren't expected much, I don't think.
So everybody thinks A.J. Preller, Mr. Trade, killed it at the trading deadline with the Padres.
I think he went all in.
Yeah, I guess out of any team, right, the Padres went all in. And they're on a bender right now, sort of 5 games or so behind the Dodgers if you haven't been paying attention.
And as I just said before, dead even with the D-backs. And I think, but they emptied out. They traded a ton of prospects for Tanner Scott. And
the cupboard's bare there now.
Right. They've gone all in. They've pushed the chips in. They're trying to claim the win.
And and they will get a benefit when they get guys like Yu Darvish back and Joe Musgrove back. So the Padres are a team to watch in the second half of the season. They haven't got a year from Machado that they were
hoping for, yeah,
right at this point. But I think that that we thought the Dodgers are far and away going to be. They got 62 wins. They're way ahead. I think the Padres are going to be heard from, and I think they get an A.
They're not as comfortably on top of the National League West, and even the Phillies aren't as comfortably on top of the National League East as they were a month ago. So they're like, for those teams, it's not that they're necessarily worried about not making the playoffs, but they're thinking, oh great, we kind of now have to play through August and into September to lock up this division, and that just gets a little annoying.
I don't think the Padres are going away, unlike the Giants.
They're
the last
going,
team we'll talk about.
Right, the last team to talk about here, and they didn't really. When Mark Canha is
I
one
knew
of
you were
your
gonna say that.
leading off trade deadline acquisitions, it's hard to really talk about you like you did anything amazing.
So I think the Giants are losers because I am confused. So that's a team that actually had playoff aspirations, right? This year, and they made a fair amount of off-season deals, including the aforementioned Blake Snell and Robbie Ray.
Right, but then they made moves
ago.
to get off of money at this trading deadline. They got rid of Cobb and Soler, which were almost salary dumps in a way.
Too many teams to climb over. I don't know that they traded away. They traded away some decent prospects, and yet I don't think they really changed their fates at all.
I think if you're the Giants, you're ultimately saying, okay, can Snell and Robbie Ray basically pitch like Cy Young winners the rest of the way? If they do that, maybe you can make the postseason. If they don't, you weren't going to make the postseason.
So the summary here is that it was a kind of boring trading deadline. I think everybody kind of feels that way. Not any big players moved. Not any 100 top prospects moved. And I think this is the future of the trade deadline. And
it'll be interesting to see if teams move into trading in the off season more.
Right, because I don't think you can't wait to this time because teams are like, yeah, no, you're not going to do that.
Exactly.
And so you're not going to get it. So, the rest of the season is going to be interesting. And whether they move the trading deadline at some point, there's been some talk about pushing it back a little bit. I don't know if that's going to make sense or not. That's something that maybe we'll talk about in another podcast.
Mm-hmm.